amazing just to see that. That was fun. My name is Dr. Ifetayo Ojelade. I'm the executive director of A Healing Paradigm, and I am also a licensed psychologist. I am very happy to be here today with two of my colleagues, Dr. Samuel Maddox, who is a licensed child psychologist, and Mr. Calvin Smith, soon to be Dr. Smith, who is a very, very soon, who is a certified school psychologist, and he is the assessment coordinator at A Healing Paradigm. Oh, and I forgot to mention that Dr. Maddox is an associate professor at Clayton State University also, in addition to working at A Healing Paradigm as a psychologist. We are going to talk about a subject that takes us in a little bit of a different direction, because the three of us have talked before, and we usually are talking about very young children. And today we're going to talk about higher education. So we're going to be talking about college students and looking specifically at academic accommodations that when people are transitioning, particularly from that high school age and they're going into college, what are some of the things that we need to consider in terms of academic accommodations, particularly for students in this time of COVID-19, where they may be learning completely in a virtual environment. So I am going to get out of the way mostly. I'm going to ask some questions. I see Dr. Earl Lewis coming on. Let me see if she wants to give us a greeting for a second. Hold on. Dr. Earl Lewis, do you want to come and give us a greeting? Hey.
Good afternoon. I am literally seated into learning activities. So I want to thank you so much for being such a wonderful host and partner with the Faculty Development Teaching and Advising Center and Africana Studies program at Morehouse College. This is such a big lift during this moment, and we appreciate this partnership far more than I can ever communicate. I know that we are working with an incredible staff of psychologists who are committed to the prosperity, health, and survival of people of African descent, and we need you in this moment. So thank you for the partnership. I want to say hello to all of my colleagues at Morehouse College. I will be on, but on mute, and look forward to seeing you on October 16th when I get to lead the Black Joy Experience. Thanks again, The Healing Paradigm.
Thank you.
Go House, Dr. Maddox.
Yes. I got my maroon and white on. I don't know if it translates into the camera well, but it's maroon and white. So
Indeed. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Dr. Earl Lewis. My apologies. Dr. Maddox is a Morehouse man. So yes, I should have acknowledged that up front, that he's a Morehouse man. And it's not bad that he went to the second best school, and Mr. Smith and I went to the best HBCU on the planet, Rattlers.
I think you got the camera reversed. You put it in the wrong order there, Dr.
So thank you, Dr. Earl Lewis. We look forward to continuing our connection.
Thank you.
So let's start out. Look, as I'm saying so, I told y'all you couldn't say so, and then I keep saying so. I want us to start out just talking a little bit about when we say academic accommodations, because people hear that, and I don't think that outside of like psychology circles that people know exactly what that means. So what does it mean when you say academic accommodations, particularly as it relates to college students?
So with college students, when we use the word accommodations, oftentimes it actually is linked to specific policies and rules when we talk about providing an accommodation. One of the key things to be aware of is there are things that you can do in line with those policy and rules, but there are also things that you are able to do as a faculty member to make sure you're supporting your students and helping to advocate for your students. And so when we say accommodations, we're talking about things that are essentially trying to provide students with equal access. What that means is there's something that's preventing that student of whether it be a condition or particular issue that's preventing them from being able to access that curriculum like the other students in that class. And so our job then is to make sure that they have equal access. Some of these, again, are going to be based on actual federal laws like the Americans with Disabilities Act, specifically Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. Mm-hmm. There are specific laws that say if you're receiving federal funds in any way, and colleges are because you have financial aid, federal financial aid the students pay tuition with, that means that you then have to make sure you have equal access. This means if the student has a physical disability, visual disability, deaf, hard of hearing, or some other type of mental or cognitive condition that may impact their learning. And so when we say accommodations, that's that kind of legal aspect of it. But there are also things that you can do, we refer to as universal design, that helps everyone in the class, even whether or not they have any kind of conditions or issues, to be able to improve and do well in that particular classroom environment.
And I do want to come back to that. So remind me that universal design, I think that's an important concept. So Mr. Smith, talk to us, what would that look like specifically for a college student?
Well, that just depends on each particular student and what their needs are. So the process is, so I do want to say that definition of accommodation is also the same K through 12. So it's just access. How do you get access to this academic material? So that would depend on the student. It could be, so that process changes and they would have to go through whatever office. I know at Morehouse it's the accessibility center, but most colleges have some disability resource center or something of that type.
Right.
And so they have to go through that, present the information that's saying, here is the disability. And then there's this piece of advocacy that the student usually has to have. What accommodations are you asking for? And so they go through that process of, that could include a note taker, it depends on the institution.
Interesting.
Because institutions aren't necessarily required to give you a note taker or any personal devices, but some have that. There are some students who volunteer to be note takers for students who have those difficulties. And so if they have that resource, they'll use that. The accommodations could include extended time. It could include the use of a calculator. It could include taking your test in a separate, at a testing center in a separate environment. It just depends on what the student is trying to advocate for and what resources that institution has.
You didn't say, did you? I didn't hear you say, I don't think, extended time.
Yeah, extended time.
Oh, okay. My bad. Because I know that's the thing that we get all the time in the office. Nobody thinks about anything else. They just want extended time.
Yeah, that's one of the huge ones. Yep. That is usually extended time, separate environment for test taking, and then some type of notes, like if they can get the notes from the professor. Those are the big three.
I was going to jump in. The extended time is always interesting. Like you say, that's usually the big request, and people think, okay, the more extended time I get, the better. Sometimes that actually works against whatever condition you're trying to accommodate. So if it's a attentional issue like ADHD or, which is a problem with sustained attention, actually having double time to do an exam, it would actually be more problematic. And so sometimes, having to kind of talk with clients I work with about this actually wouldn't be in your best interest to try to get double time, maybe time and a half, so that if you do become distracted, you can still be on task. But that double time can be problematic. I also want to go back to your game you did at the beginning. One of the things sometimes we're trying to accommodate too is the fact of when things are timed. So what got me is when you said 15 seconds, I was like, okay, I'll forfeit. I could answer it, but I'm going to think through and make sure I say it more carefully. So if you have students who have that kind of cognitive style, sometimes that actual time itself becomes a huge issue. And so doubling it sometimes actually creates more anxiety or creates more challenge. And so you want to be aware, again, it's not just because a student has a condition, this is going to be the automatic accommodation. You want to make sure it's actually doing what it's supposed to do with an accommodation, increasing their access to be able to perform to their potential.
So then if a student comes to you, like let's say you have a freshman And I want to talk specifically as this relates to professors. So you're a professor at a university, both of you teach at institutions of higher learning. A student comes up to you and they just tell you they have a learning disability and they need an accommodation, and they send a note from a psychologist to you directly that says they need an accommodation. What do you do?
I inform them to contact whatever the center may be. At Clayton State, it's the Disability Resource Center. And the reason being is that does get back into that federal law piece I was talking about.
Yeah.
And the fact of it could be unfair to other students if you provide an accommodation without official approval through ours is Disability Resource Center. And so I would encourage that student to provide that documentation to them, because it's not an automatic guarantee just because you have a learning disability or some condition that you will get that particular accommodation or any accommodations. It has to go through this kind of approval and assessment process. So that would be my first sort of recommendation. But then I'd also say what often comes up is sometimes students may drop the ball on that. I would follow up with them. Okay, we got exam 2 about to come up next week. How has it been communicating with Disability Resource Center? You need any assistance making contact with them? So I do think providing that extra additional advocacy is important, because and I'm going to defer back to Mr. Smith. He knows kind of how these transition plans work, but you're dealing with a freshman. So they're coming out of high school where it's a different set of laws, where everybody's required to kind of do all these things and monitor for them. And now they have to self-advocate at the college level. They may need some assistance with it. And so that's why I think, we follow the laws with the accommodation, but we can still be advocates for the students to be able to get those accommodations.
And so, Mr. Smith, jump in there. I'm just curious about that transition when you have a freshman coming in, because in high school, then you're going to have a team that's there to be able to support the student. But once they turn 18 and they show up on that college campus, it's up to them.
Yeah. So the goal, at least in my head, even K through 12, if they are still in the special education arena or have a 504 plan, then
504 is
Section 504 is a part of the Section 504 with Disabilities Rehabilitation Act. I forget all the names.
Yeah.
So that's where they have some medical condition that will allow them to receive accommodations, access to the educational curriculum. So if they're they're receiving the special education services, there is a transition meeting. But prior to that transition meeting, I make it a special effort to have the student start to take responsibility during those meetings. So starting in middle school is where I say, well, let's invite the child to the meeting so that he or she knows what's going on, what we're talking about. They can give their input. But many times that doesn't happen. So that's just what it is. So during that transition meeting, they can be useful. They also may not be, because if the student really isn't involved, then they don't know how to advocate. They're just there. And so then they get to this college campus and now it's complete switch. Nobody's advocating for you. If you don't say you have a disability or certain needs, then you don't get whatever accommodations that you had before. Which is blessing and curse, because some people don't want that label. When they go to college, they want to be a new person. They don't want that to follow them. Other people need that and don't know how to go about that transition. So like Dr. Maddox said, it's important for, first of all, just the transition from high school to college can be difficult by itself. No disability, no, that, especially if you go out of state, you by yourself.
Lord have mercy.
In my case, I can't imagine, I had friends, I went to predominantly Black schools most of my life. So my friends who went to PWIs later was like, what is this? So if you have somebody, the professors, if you have somebody, I know there are a lot of things going on, but just to help them through that process of go to this center, here's what you do, follow up like Dr. Maddox says. And even I sometimes will in the interim say, look, here are my office hours, come on this day, we're going to do some compensatory strategies now while you're going through that process. so that we can kind of ease some of the stress you may be feeling.
And so, like, once they get on campus, let's say that they don't say anything to you, they're clearly struggling. What are some of the things that you would suggest, either one of you would suggest as a professor? What would you say to the student?
And this is where I kind of go with some kind of universal design strategies, and the fact of I try to make sure to catch students who are struggling, and kind of like Ms. Smith was saying, kind of invite them to office hours, because the challenge is going to be real. You have, I can tell you, even with clients I've worked with, a lot of times they feel like it's a stigma having, a condition that gets an accommodation. And now I'm in college, I don't have to tell anybody about this.
Mm-hmm.
So that student's struggling, they still may not want to be forthcoming about it. And again, to respect their privacy, you can't kind of delve in, hey, did you, have an IEP when you were back in high school? You can't ask that question. But I try to have conversations with students. What are some of the challenges you're finding with the course, with the material, with the lecture? And then I always put it, it's in the syllabus, but I also stress it when I talk about, hey, we have a disability resource center on campus. They provide a lot of services in which you can receive accommodations. And so oftentimes I'll reiterate that back in the conversation when I'm meeting with the student face to face, of looking back over the syllabus. You hear some resources: Center for Academic Success, Disability Resource Center. So that kind of brings back to the student, here's something you may have, but it is going to be on them to kind of initiate, because we can't, get into their personal private business. But once they initiate, I try to make sure I'm there for them and helping them get connected. Any kind of barriers they're facing, I try to make sure we at least can problem solve. Okay, here's who you need to contact, or here's who may be able to address that.
Yeah, just to piggyback on that, I think a big part of it is just letting them know what resources are available.
Mm-hmm.
Many times you don't know. So without prying, like even study skills tutors are available, even if it's not disability related. There are just a lot of resources on these institutions, campuses, that some students don't know about.
Mm-hmm.
What if you have a professor that's working on a campus that does not have resources? What do you suggest?
That's where I go into you're going to see a lot of students struggling, not just the ones who require accommodations. Mm-hmm. And so if there are not those resources there, again, I feel like as professors, it's our job to try to make sure we provide the best educational environment. So I will try to design my class for everyone to make sure that resources are built in within my classroom. Now, I can't accommodate for other courses the students may be taking, but at least I can take on my part of trying to provide additional resources. So that may be I'm doing study sessions, or I'm doing linking them to the additional online resources, especially now during COVID. Being able to kind of reach out and find those additional resources may be helpful. It's kind of, the statement kind of, we all rise together. By helping everyone, you can then also help the individual who may need a specific accommodation.
I love that. And what was the term you used earlier? And I said, we'll come back to that.
Universal design.
Universal design.
So that process is essentially where you design your classroom for every type of learner. And so sometimes this is challenging, because even as a professor, I have my kind of style of learning that I know I'm biased towards, but I try to make sure that any information the student's going to access. So don't have as much control over the website now, but try to make sure at least my website is universally accessible. So for students who are visual learners, students who are more auditory learners, students who have to have kind of some type of really engaging, because of attentional issues, I try to make sure that I'm providing those resources through my actual classroom instruction itself. So I put in a variety of different tasks that may be related to the same topic, but the student can kind of gravitate to which one helps them learn it better. So what universal design is basically saying you're designing it in a way where it has open access for everyone. A physical example, like on the curb cuts for people with wheelchairs, it also help you if you're dragging a suitcase or something like that. So it ends up being beneficial for everyone to have that there.
Right. And so I see Mandy posted a question. She said, I need resources in Owensboro, Kentucky. And so I guess you've kind of answered the question in terms of, as a professor, having the universal design and creating different types, ensuring that each different type of learning style is addressed in how you present the material. Do you have other ideas, Mr.
So
Smith?
they're actually universal design, training and websites out there too that can be very, very useful. And some of them has been part of the training we got at Clayton State. And so I've been able to kind of draw on some of those resources. I would definitely reach out to whoever the technology person may be at that university. There's always a technology person. They have a lot of knowledge and ideas about stuff that may not even be directly to